there are conservatives and there are progressives. There are Democrats, there are Republicans, there are people in the middle. And one of the biggest problems with, in addition to being an empty term, another problem with the language around ESG is that it assumes that we all share the same set of values. It is very moral. It says that there is only one right thing to do, and it is the progressive right thing to do. That there's only one way to make a positive impact society, and it's the progressive way of approaching things. Now, even if you believe that's true, that doesn't mean that you should say it if you're talking to a group of people that may not share your values.
Right.
There are ways to move this beyond a purely kind of values-driven, moralizing message to accomplish the goal more effectively. And to me, it all comes back to, what are we trying to achieve? If we can achieve the goal more effectively, and we can remain accurate, but we can use language that takes the temperature down, we should do that. So the first kind of language shift that we would recommend is a shift from ESG to a focus on responsible business. And I see that somebody mentioned that in the chat. The interesting thing about this term, responsible business, when we ask people about it, is when we ask people, what is a responsible business? They describe all the elements of ESG. A company that takes care of their employees, that cares about the environment, that invests in local communities, that is managed well. They describe it, but what they don't say is they don't make it political when it's about a responsible business. And while we may disagree on what is the right thing to do, it is kind of less. I think certainly we didn't hear any of the instinctive polarization of people saying, well, what's right for you is not right for me when it comes to responsibility. People don't say, well, that's responsible to me, but it's going to be irresponsible to you. There's like a much closer connection. So when you start thinking about the language of responsible business, first of all, if it's two words, it is at least somewhat less likely to be turned into an acronym than three letters. And when you hear responsible business, you are likely to have positive associations and the right kind of associations. And so it kind of wins from a linguistic perspective. And then it's not just the high level message that we think needs to evolve. It is thinking about the entire kind of lexicon and approach that we use to talking about the different actions that we'll take. And there are really three areas that I think the current language gets us in trouble. We call it kind of a shift to real brand value. And real is about using language that is understandable and tangible to the average person.
Yep.
If you think about the idea of managing human capital, which is probably on an ESG scorecard, versus taking care of employees, they arguably connote very close to, if not exactly the same thing. But I think you should talk about taking care of employees because everybody understands what it is that you're trying to achieve. If you talk about, scope 3 emissions versus all of the emissions, that impact, or the emissions created by customers, like, why don't we use plain language that doesn't have a political connotation to it? Because there's one other aspect that I'll just touch on briefly, and that is that some political commentators out there, and I happen to agree with them, say that the battle that's being waged right now, it's less about right versus left. It is more about elite versus everybody else. And that what a lot of conservatives are rebelling against is the sense that there are these elites who are dictating what is going on. And the way that elites tend to position themselves as exclusionary is they come up with language that only they can understand. And so let's create language that everybody understands, not make it sound like we are trying to be elitist, whether or not we are, and let everybody in on the benefits of focusing on environmental sustainability, on treating everybody equally, and on managing our businesses well, and we'll be much better off.
Yeah, I think the word responsible is really interesting. The fact that Patagonia is already using it, per someone in the chat, means that it's already sort of probably in the lexicon of words that brands that people respect and admire will pick up on. It was actually the word responsible was a topic of a conversation across the Impact Relations Board recently. And it certainly removes, what I found interesting was that it removes the morality to it. And it was much easier to digest. So that was really interesting. I'm going to go off book here because I just want to ask about sort of the spreading of a new word and how that could work. You know, if ESG in all of its issues is accepted, how quickly can new words spread? And will it be seen as a mask to what the problem really is?
Well, so I think, one thing that's an important context here is that there is no formal definition of ESG. There is nobody who owns the term ESG. There's a lot of inconsistency in how ESG is used. Same with sustainability, same with corporate social responsibility, same with corporate responsibility. All of these terms have grown up organically. They've been adopted by some. They've been used in different ways. We did work for an asset manager on sustainable investing. And even if we've done a lot of work in that space, but just this one, they use ESG for integration, like for their scorecarding, but they use sustainable investing, but they've also got responsible investing, but they've also got impact investing. It's like there are right now 1 million terms in this space. And so in some ways that makes it easier for a new term to emerge. I think the incentives for a new term are that companies want to talk about this stuff and they don't want to get the shit kicked out of them. And that if there is a term that offers the promise of letting them take advantage of the opportunity that comes with talking about these issues and minimizes or mitigates the risk that goes along with it, that's a pretty good incentive to start moving in this direction. I mean, the initial feedback that we've gotten, the kind of the most obvious areas is that places or companies that are still using corporate social responsibility are now moving to maybe just remove the social, because social in and of itself is a politically coded term. And again, like, just to be clear, one of the things that I talk about a lot when it comes to language is that some messages make us feel good and some messages work. And they're usually not the same thing. And we can get pissed off and annoyed that people don't like the language that we like or don't agree with us on certain values and beliefs. I care about results. And I just want to find the path of least resistance to achieving the goals that I want or my clients want. And I don't want language to get in the way. I want it to help. And so if, as I think it is here, getting in the way, how do we clear that out and make it easier? And somebody I know mentioned actions in here. I actually think that the riskier it is to talk about this stuff, first of all, if they do stuff and they can't talk about it and try and get credit for it, then they're much less likely to do it, right? Unless they're being pushed.
Right. How does a company get credit for responsible business?
Well, they might put out a responsible business report just as they did an ESG report. They might talk about their actions in the same way. I am talking about what is fundamentally a change in language, not substance. And people will say, well, it's just semantics. Like, semantics is the whole ball game here.
Like the biggest thing.
Sure. Sorry, go ahead.
One of the biggest issues with CSR, corporate social responsibility, was that it became this offsetting play where they cut a check to charity to offset, carbon emissions that they were putting out into the universe, whatever it was. Like, there's not that framework in place. So if it's responsible business and they're issuing a responsible business report, could it possibly get ambiguous again? Because there's, and I know you're not saying, you're not suggesting that the framework be removed. My concern with the language specifying the framework being removed is that it does become ambiguous, so that people can kind of make up what responsible business means. And for a lot of people on the right, responsible business means maximizing returns. And then it kind of goes a step back.
I don't agree. I mean, we could debate that, but and ask people what they think. I don't think that that's true. And I think the notion that ESG right now is not ambiguous
Mm-hmm.
Like you can pick your scorecard. You can, you got a lot of flexibility on your materiality assessments. Like ESG is ambiguous. May not be as ambiguous as CSR was, but it is. And so
it's definitely not perfect.
Right. And so nothing's going to be perfect. The point here is, why are we holding on to this term that now has clear downsides?
Mm-hmm.
And again, I'm not sure what the upsides are going to be when companies start to be more and more afraid about putting out a report that says it's an ESG report. They may report out on it still, but it just becomes much more politically hazardous.
So it's associated with woke capitalism, and it's not hard to become an ethical capitalist, but it is hard to be an ethical capitalist that outperforms an unethical capitalist. And that's kind of been the case for a long time. But it's changing. And I think that is the part that kind of sets a risk or a threat, is that possibly this ethical capitalist ideal can outperform the fossil fuel, the traditional capitalist ideals. And that's money out of their pocket. That's leaving money on the table. So it's become political in that regard. But do you think that the anti-woke capitalist war is this kind of shushing it? Is it kind of saying, is it kind of telling ESG to go away, and it's giving points back to the other end? How do you think this is going to level the political playing field, not just calm language and create least resistance?
So again, I think I will, if we look at what the data says, I won't give my opinion. If we look at what the data says right now, you've got a conservative population in America where 90% of Republicans believe that companies are forcing morals down their throats. 90% of Republicans. Okay.
Yeah.
So we can disagree with Republicans all we want. They still make up a significant percentage of the population, and they still feel like the way that a lot of companies talk about a lot of issues is moral and values oriented and disrespectful of their opinions. And that's not a way to win. The way to win is there are a lot of things that they agree with a whole lot more than what they think that they agree with. And part of it is because the conservative media is demonizing these things, but part of it is because we tested a narrative where we were using companies' own language to communicate progressive values on ESG. Generates incredible amounts of agreement from progressives. It generates incredible amount of disagreement from conservatives. Companies are not in the business of alienating half of the population. And so why can't we just find a way forward that lets them see? Republicans want environmental sustainability. They want companies to take care of their employees. Right now, the language is getting in the way of it. And so again, I think we have to remove it. And Jen, I know you were going to jump in with the question.
Yeah, but I actually have another one. I just wanted to ask about everyone's favorite topic of Gen Z, and if this, as we think about the future, and we think about the future of politics and the future of voters and business leaders, if you see a difference of opinion or reactions by generation, and if you think we need to be anticipating how they'll react or how they'll come together or not.
I don't want to draw any kind of overly large conclusions about this group on the call here, but if we're talking about Gen Z on the coasts working for companies that are in largely progressive markets, then yes, you've got a deeply progressive set of views among Gen Z. If you look across the country, at Gen Z and you nationalize the results by age cohort, you see much less difference than with other age groups. Like, yes, there are more members of Gen Z who are more progressive than other age groups, as there always is. As you look from young to old, older people are always more conservative, but it is not wildly so. And so, if we say like the arc of history is leaning towards progressive values, I think that that's true. I think what we need to recognize, however, is that there's still plenty of people at all levels that don't agree with those things. And there are more and more of them that get pushed in that direction, the more that they are made to feel bad for having views that are outside of the progressive kind of mainstream.
Yeah. We have 1 minute before I want to sort of open up Q&A. And I can tell the chat is on fire. So there's going to be a lot of Q&A. So I actually have just one last question, and it's really just knowing the audience we have here today, which is around what advice do you have? Obviously, there's a variety of levels and types of marketers and communicators in the audience here today. But I was wondering if you could give general advice, and I'll plug for you if you have more specific advice, call Michael, he'll help you. But what can we take away, and how can we bring this back to our organizations and brands to communicate?
Yeah, so I think, again, if we stay focused on the goal, we've got certain things that companies, our clients or companies that we work for want to achieve. In this case, why we want to achieve them can actually be damaging, as opposed to talking about reducing emissions, talking about protecting local communities, talking about taking care of employees. Like, we don't need to explain why as we do what. If any of you have seen Apple's sustainability video, they do a really good job of talking about what they've done. They actually spend most of their time on the what. They spend a lot less on the why. Okay? You don't want to make enemies out of the people that you are selling to or that are working for you. And so we use plain language. We make sure that the actions that we're taking are connected to our brand. They are seen as authentic by our audience. And we say authenticity is actually in the eye of the beholder. Bud Light was a colossal disaster, mostly because the public didn't think that Dylan Mulvaney was a Bud Light customer. And so it felt like it was just far afield from the brand. So we connect the actions that we take to our brand. And the third is that we talk about value, not values. What's in it for the business? Okay, the business can care about and have a responsibility to multiple stakeholders, but it should be clear that that is good for business, right? Like, taking care of my employees is good for business. Taking care of the local communities where I operate is good for business. Taking care of the environment that we are a part of is good for business. And the more that we can connect what it is that we're doing to business, even if we've got other reasons for doing it, the better off, the safer, the more effective that we will be.
Great. That's great advice. I was thinking how to bring that back to my manager and say, here's how we're going to move forward. So a couple of questions from the audience and team, feel free to jump in and put more questions in, but just a few that have come through. So the first was actually around CSR language and how people are currently reacting to that. We obviously saw a shift and a movement away from that as ESG evolved. But do you think it's something to reconsider? Do you think it was ambiguous? It still is ambiguous. What research have you seen on that?
So I don't know how much, we have some data from what we've done, but I think generally, if you think about CSR, it probably had the same level of awareness as ESG does, meaning that most people don't know what it is. I think the word social is going to be the most challenging word in that term. And so corporate responsibility is going to do better with the broader public. And again, it's a place where there are people who live and work in the community. The language that you use in the community gives you a sense of identity and purpose, shared kind of values. And so it's tough to give up that language. But every major debate these days ends up being in the kind of the public domain. And so you should choose the language that's most effective. So I think corporate responsibility is a safe place to play, whereas corporate social responsibility, first of all, it often becomes CSR, and so people are much less likely to understand it. and it just runs the risk of creating negative associations that you don't need.
Great, thank you. Another question from Brad, Impact Relations Zone. From an employee perspective, we hear more and more about candidates wanting to join organizations that business values align with their own personal values. How can we make this appeal while not polarizing candidates or customers? And I'll add, or shareholders.
Yeah, so I think the more that we make the language human, the easier it is to do. So I'll even take, DE&I, and aside from the fact that, again, the acronym is something that people won't know, but if you start talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, by design, diversity, equity, inclusion now has a whole universe of meaning that is embedded in it. For most people, I believe, and I think we've seen data to this effect, what they want is to operate in a company that respects who they are as people, that includes them, that takes care of them, and that customers may want to do business with companies that seem to have an employee base that reflects who they are as people. This is a much more human way of talking about this term. It removes the jargon and the politicized language. And so the way that I would approach it is I would try to stay away from all of this jargon. And I would talk about what it is that you stand for in plain language, what it is that you're doing in plain language. I mean, we do know that the closer that things connect to business, the more people see, the more often that more people see it as an appropriate place for business. And so if I say that, that we want to make sure that we have a diverse employee base because we have a diverse customer base. Even conservatives agree that makes sense. It's appropriate, it's supported, and so it really is just kind of bringing it down to that simple, plain spoken level.
Yeah. Michael? Even hearing you describe it, it feels right. Feels good.
Jen, can I just say one thing?
Yes, please, go ahead.
First off, Michael, thank you. That was extremely helpful. The shortest plug I can possibly give, if you are a brand, a nonprofit, or an agency member, bring in the Maslansky and Partners team. I'm telling you, language matters. I had the good fortune of working with Michael's team in a previous career, and I will tell you, every time we brought in Maslansky and Partners, the dynamics of the engagement changes because you start to see truly how words resonate with the audience. It is something to see. It's spectacular. So that's all I want to say there.
I love that plug, Brad. That's exactly right. I think we have time for one or two more questions. One popped up that I thought was really interesting around this trend outside the US. We tend to sort of focus on North America. And obviously the politics take up a lot of media in North America, but was wondering if you were seeing similar sentiment or if you have research beyond our borders.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say it's definitely US centric. I think we're seeing it a bit in the UK, but I think it is following a lot of the kind of polarization of politics. It is natural that this will follow. So right now, obviously, there's much stronger support for ESG in Europe than there is any place else in the world. I think that will likely continue, and it is a good argument that it may take longer to move away from the term in those markets than it does in the US. That being said, I think the same political dynamics that have played out in the US are now playing out more and more in Europe, and this is going to be, I think, similarly a victim, even though it's Europe kind of operates further ahead on the curve on environmental and social issues in general.
Yeah, that I'll tell you from my experience working at global organizations, that's one of the hardest parts is reconciling the different regions and the speed at which they're moving and having a global position, but ensuring you're bringing all of your employees along and of course all of your customers along. We have 7 minutes left. I have a couple of housekeeping things, but I do have one final question because we didn't get to it in the beginning. On your website, it says to make sure we ask you about MAS 1.0, and I want to know what that is and what we should ask you about it.
Well, so I had a partner a long time ago who had set the tone for the culture. It was a rough and tumble culture. I think Brad knows who I'm talking about, and I was let's say less evolved than I am. I went through a 360 process, got tremendous feedback, painful feedback from my team, and made some changes. And that was the nickname that was given to me was MAS 2.0, in contrast to MAS 1.0 that had come before. So.
Is that what we should be calling you, is MAS instead of Michael?
MAS is, yes, that's what I
okay.
And I hope affectionately referred to, at least within my team. And more broadly.
Well, we're happy to have MAS 2.0 today. Although I would like to redo this with MAS 1.0 and just see what happens, see how rowdy it gets in this group. I will plug what Brad.
I also just want to jump in real quick, Jen.
Yeah, of course.
For being such a good sport and letting me challenge these thoughts and this language. There's a lot of ESG proponents on this line and that will be listening, and I wanted to make sure that their thoughts, concerns, and ideals were sort of expressed too in this conversation. So thanks for fielding all of those questions.
Yeah.
I think you gave us some good responses and good things to consider. Absolutely.
I think this type of productive conversation, even with differing opinions, is what's going to actually progress us more and more, and making sure everyone is brought along as opposed to just talking to ourselves over and over again. So I think this has been really awesome. We got to so many great questions, but there was obviously a lot left in the chat. So I would encourage everyone to reach out to Michael, maybe not all at once, but we can drop his website into the chat. Reach out, as Brad said, hire him for everything, or at least talk to him to see how he can help, because he is brilliant. Regretting the mistake my organization made a couple years ago. And if there's anyone else you want to speak to who you saw on the line today, or if you want to chat with Melissa, again, feel free to contact us. We'll send a follow-up survey. Please take it. We also are always open and welcome to other topics you want to hear about. I feel like maybe there's an ESG MAS 2.0 conversation to be had here. So maybe we'll pick this back up as we get closer to elections next year. And as a final reminder, please subscribe to the Impact Relations Agenda, which is a newsletter we send out that will cover some of these topics. Follow us on all of the social channels so that we can continue the conversations. And I think those are all my housekeeping closures. Jenna, thumbs up. Did I get it all? Okay, awesome.
Dan, thank you both for those questions.
We'll be circulating a recording after the fact, so please feel free to share it with others, and stay tuned for more on our next Impact Council.
Excellent.
Sounds good.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.